Hello, Northstar here with another episode of probably not going to be a long running thing, but for those of you who weren't warned off before by what I said about this game, Singularity, evolution never ends. It's a pretty repetitive and boring game. It does give me a chance to talk things on my mind. Be warned, a lot of this will diverge towards politics, economics, finance today. That's what's on my mind. Um, but I will say about this game, there are things many players aren't aware of. If you do ignore my warnings, I don't know, want to see yourself suffer, isn't enough to see me suffer playing this game on the videos. There are things you should at least be aware of. One, you can end simulations. The main simulation, to do that the first time, if you remember, you have to get your first meta bit, which means going way up the tree. I think you have to make it to the quote-unquote singularity, which is some libertarian bro bullshit. The fact that this game already, and the way it's phrased, is already concerning, regardless of the other signs that the dev who made this game is seriously pushing right-wing bullshit propaganda through his game. When it touches on economics and politics, you see it even just with the idea of singularity, which is some utter nonsense that you'll see. What do we call them? Techno-optimists who try and basically they have a near religious belief that technology will solve our problems because it enables them to obviate responsibility for making society better, for struggling to do things that are hard, like limiting the power of the rich. No, technology is not going to make the billionaires getting richer, everyone else gets poor, better. In fact, it's going to empower those who have the money to hire experts to figure out the best ways to use, say, new AI technology to make them richer. Ordinary people are not going to be able to keep up. They may see benefits in their productivity and earnings in the short run, but in the long run, the rich will get patents, they'll get control of things, they'll figure out better ways to use stuff because they can hire experts, and they'll actually squish everyone else beneath their boot and end up with even more money while everyone else just gets poor. It's not. Technology will not save us. If you think technology alone will save us from the increasing inequality in our society, you're insane. That's not to say that technology isn't good and doesn't make society better. It does theoretically make society better if it's used in the right way, and certain technologies tend to be harder to misuse or more likely to be used correctly. For instance, investing in medical technology. There's a chance that could just be limited to the rich with no one else getting it, but it's more likely that medical technologies will eventually become available to all, even if in an unequal system like ours, there would be a delay that's unjustifiable morally between the rich getting access to cutting edge tech and everyone else, than say this AI stuff, which is much more likely to just make the rich richer. So technology that would really make the rich richer, and you could very hard to find a way it could help everyone else, is weapons technology. You know, a new stealth bomber, a new bomb delivery system. That's probably going to help the rich get richer by dominating the Third World War. It's not going to help ordinary people at all. So that's the extreme of technology. It doesn't help you or me. Could it be used to make the world better? Theoretically, yeah. If you had like a socialist democratic government that was actually controlled by the people with like workers' councils and stuff, and it was used to, I don't know, to hunt the occasional religious terrorists who were actually trying to just blow stuff up. Although there's a question of whether such extremist groups would even exist. I hate the way the word extremist has been co-opted so that people will say, oh, extremists are religious fundamentalists, but they're also right fascists, but they're also socialists. That's bullshit. It's a false equivalency. The people who say that really just want to smear the socialists. They'll say that and then they'll focus most of their attention on the left, because what they really don't want is the left having any credibility or power. Always be wary of people who push that horseshoe theory bullshit, because it is nothing but nonsense. But yeah, is there theoretically worlds we can imagine where even weapons technology can make things better? Yeah, but it's highly unlikely in the world we live in. Generally, it's going to make the world worse. Whereas medical technology is a tech that's much harder to co-opt, and there's all sorts of gray areas between those extremes. Um, Technology that reduces carbon emissions are also on the end of probably going to make the world better. You get the idea. Maybe that's the real extreme, even more than medical technology. Of most likely to be used for good. The thing that was on my mind, I started recording this before only for Windows to, for some way, dragging my finger on the touchpad to just pull up email program that I don't even use, but it was showing my real name, which it should never bloody do. Obviously, I can't have that on YouTube, and I've probably some right-winger stalking me or sending me death threats. I've received death threats before on Reddit, so which I reported, and then the app did absolutely nothing about because it came from right-wingers. Somehow when left-wingers threaten people, there's this hunt and they get dealt with, from what I've heard. But I've known multiple people on the left who have received death threats and nothing ever happens to people threatening them. It's because corporations don't give a shit about the safety of left-wingers, only of suppressing the left. And that app was getting more and more and more controlled by like Hasbro propaganda operatives. Those are Israeli, not just intelligence agents, but they often recruit college students and pay them a little money to troll on the internet. College students, as it turns out, will do this for very, very little money because trolling, I think, comes naturally to them. It isn't that hard, and they're cynical. They kind of hate the world. They hate some people. Anyhow, not everyone, but there's a subset who will be ready recruits for this sort of thing, and many college students are short on money. So for a little bit of money, they'll go online. They'll troll people who say anything that impinges on the ideology of the Israeli Zionist project. For instance, that's Hasbro. You'll see neo-Nazis online. You'll see all sorts of utterly despicable people who are on Reddit and bully and try and silence the left. And then they turn around and draw false equivalency. Extremists, right and left are the same. No, we're not. It's not the same between people who literally want to kill you because of your ethnicity and people who just want, free housing, health care, want to end the power of the rich and nationalize their corporations. That's not the same thing at all. That's a false equivalency. A false equivalency that the rich and powerful enjoy because they rarely get identified as being extremists, even if neoliberal ideology be considered in certain times in history relatively extreme right-wing ideology. This complete power for the very rich it leads to would have been both shocking and familiar to say FDR, but if you go back to say the Middle Ages, people probably condemn it as ungodly and heathen, and they'd probably be right. The Overton window and what we consider normal changes over history. That shouldn't be a controversial statement. Anyways, I don't use Reddit anymore, partly because of the neo-Nazis, partly because I was getting harassed by a moderator of a sub there, and I tried messaging the other moderators in that sub to say, what, this guy is misbehaving, he's swearing at me, he's not in line, and could you do something about it? Not knowing which of the moderators at sub was the one who done it, because you can't see anonymous, and instead they were clearly, at least one was in on it, or maybe it was the person who did it, reported to Reddit, and they banned me for harassing the mods. What I was doing is very kindly saying, very respectfully, this person is harassing me and misusing their power as a moderator. Could you please take a look at their messages? That was the final line for seeing how they protect the far right. In this case, it was a group of far right people who were taking over a sub, specifically to silence criticism of Israel. That was what was going on here. It was a Hasbro operation for sure. While they silence anyone who's a critic of the status quo. And I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous. I'm sure the reason that some of those moderators, at least couple of them, were probably Hasbro people, and then the others clueless to what was going on, because why would they know? It only takes 2 or 3 people to ruin a whole sub on Reddit, and on the moderator team if they get in that position of power. Anyhow, there's multiple scenes in this game. They don't really interact as much as they should. I've even wrote an review about this game, and of course it'll be ignored. The main simulation doesn't really do much once you've gone up through it, and I think there's a couple trophies you can get. Then it does nothing to, say, speed up the secondary ones, which can speed up the main simulation, but why would you care? Since the whole point of this game is, well, pointless, it's maybe a little competition, a little satisfaction of seeing the late game features, some of it. There's no reason that the only point is for things to help each other go faster. And the main simulation should help these explorations be faster, for instance, but it doesn't. Sorry, go back right now. That's a bit jarring, I'm sure, the switch, but I was thinking you folks don't come here to just hear me talk politics, probably. And I was getting too deep a dive there. But I don't know. I did have things I wanted to say. When I tried recording this before Windows, for some reason, pulled up Outlook, which I never use, and I've tried uninstalling, and every time Windows updates, it reinstalls it. Annoyingly, it's taking up space. I use web servers. I'm not going to use Outlook, so I don't need them having thing, but somehow it was associated with my real name. Displayed it. I'm like, what the? Can't have that on YouTube. But what I did talk a little about, and it was a little less disjointed, but now I'm a little frustrated and harder to keep my thoughts together. Is I'd been talking about a thing I really want to talk about, which was the housing market, and how housing prices just keep coming up in the long run in the country, which is some months they go down, some years they go down. But if you look at 10 years apart time frames, 20 years, it's always going up. You can actually draw a line to describe this paper, what would be known as the best fit line. For those of you who don't know too much statistics, it would be a line that approximates where you would expect things to end up in a long period of time, when the little periods where something remains flat or goes down or increases faster average out. I don't know if that makes sense. Some people struggle with mathematics. I was always good at them, especially visual, geometric type of mathematics. If you can represent something visually in math, I'm very, very good at it. Not as much with some of the pure algebra stuff, and some of it is because it's nonsense, like imaginary numbers. They don't really exist, for instance. They represent just a relationship between things. The relationship is real, the number itself is not. And I was always bothered by how admittedly very bad math teachers tried to explain these things, and then more advanced concepts built on them. And sometimes you can technically, it looks like you're proving impossibilities in mathematics, or things that clearly aren't true. And people say, oh, just because the math works out. No, sometimes if you can make an assumption in how you do equation, or you're leaving something out, or it's wrong, doesn't mean it's right. You need to do sanity checks periodically, and some mathematicians on the other end of the spectrum are very bad about that. But best fit line's pretty simple thing, and hopefully you all understand what I meant by that. Anyways, one of the problems with housing getting more and more expensive, even though people buy houses, they sell it for more in the long run, although that's actually a bad investment. Usually the rate housing increases in price versus the carrying costs of all that debt, including it making other types of loans more expensive, like your credit score go down if you have a huge mortgage, especially if you end up missing payments or something, relative to your income, and that can make say car loans more expensive. So there's a lot in hidden costs to carrying all that debt. Which is why people are often better with a small house and investing in the index funds carefully, or mutual funds if they really can't do the stock market for themselves, which some people would have trouble with, such as people who are prone to gambling, which people who gamble, it's been shown they approach risk differently and in unhealthy ways compared to normal people. Not for most people, conservative investments in index funds in the stock market, probably in a not non-existent house, but a house that's no longer larger than you actually need. And people's definition of need isn't always accurate. You often need less than you think, but there is a range, I suppose, of more cramped versus less cramped housing. It being a luxury, but a luxury that may be cheaper than other luxuries that you would have done instead to make your life better. So it gets complicated. But from a purely financial standpoint, a small house, a standpoint of purely just spending as little as much possible and investing as much as possible, you'd want a small house and a lot of like stocks instead. I still wouldn't want a house because renting really screws you. So ownership is usually anyways. But you see people get these enormous mortgages and then they don't have money to make, say, necessary renovations on houses. And you see out in the Midwest and the Northeast, I've spent time in both areas, you'll find houses don't have, for instance, storm doors. They'll sometimes have metal front doors because they're harder to like kick down if you're worried about someone breaking your house. But metal is very conductive, so heat will leach right out through a metal door, and they won't have a storm door, which creates an air pocket that reduces heat losses. You'll see not enough insulation. You'll see windows that aren't double pane sometimes. Older buildings on top of that can also have lead paint, asbestos, lead pipes. So a lot of times it would be better to just tear some buildings down and rebuild them in more environmentally friendly ways that are better for human health, that is, don't have asbestos and stuff, and are built with extra insulation to reduce the need for heating oil, which a lot of people still use instead of, say, electric heating because it costs more money, even though it can potentially be powered by wind power, which is better for the environment. Better, though there's still coal that gets used in the production lines of wind turbines, often the steel making. So there's probably too many people on Earth for the resources and the technology level we have. Someday we may be able to sustain such a large population, but we need more advanced technology by far. Because there's still too many industrial processes that include coal. Heck, you even use it to make solar panels. Solar panels and wind turbines use less. You're going to use less coal that way to produce a watt of electricity, but you still use some. That should not be an argument for not using these things, but an argument for all energy, even if it comes from wind, still has an environmental impact, even if it's less. And even with the greenest kind of lifestyles that are realistically feasible, there's no way that we're not going to be in trouble with climate change with the number of people we have on Earth. We need fewer people and we need greener lifestyles, both. Of course, when you start talking about there being too many people, you immediately give ammo to the racists who try and say, oh, it's those poor people. No, actually, the people with the biggest carbon footprints and who most need to depopulate are the people in the richest countries on Earth. They're the ones who drive the greatest amount of CO2 production. It's Americans who need to have fewer kids, not people in Zimbabwe or wherever. You can have 100 of them produce altogether always much CO2 as one American kind of thing. It's more like 20 to 1, but you get the idea. Of course, then you also have the issue that the capitalist class will try and bring in immigrants to, if their domestic population doesn't have enough kids, keep the population stable so their workforce doesn't shrink, so they don't end up with a worker shortage that forces them to raise wages. Which again, can immediately be ammo for the racists who resent immigrants for reasons that have nothing to do with economics, and people who have very little empathy for, the immigrants who are just trying to avoid poverty, get out of bad situations, political instability, and stuff like that too. Anyhow, politics is complicated. This is and why it can be so controversial. People can always find things to be mad about in it. But one thing that's clear is if housing prices keep going up, people have less money to actually renovate housing to make necessary changes to deal with, say, climate change. Because these things are investments. They're capital now for savings later. And if you already carry a ton of debt, any additional money you borrow is probably going to take longer to repay and be at higher interest rates, and maybe make your existing loans end up have higher interest rates. For instance, if you borrow money to renovate a house and then later you need to refinance a mortgage, you may end up having to do that at a higher interest rate because you already have that loan. That you get the idea. There's carrying costs to debt, and because of that, housing prices going higher and higher is just making everything worse in society. Of course, the whole way to deal with that, some may not agree with me, but is there's a supply and demand situation. And yes, there's more supply than there is need for housing. But capitalist systems, because they're driven by greed, need a large excess of supply for prices to be reasonable on many goods. Because especially as, say, you get these real estate companies who buy up all the housing, that can reduce the effect of surplus supply and price, insulate somewhat, but it can't completely eliminate that. Of course, that means to have reasonable housing prices, the current U.S. population, you may need a simply unreasonably large amount of housing, which is why depopulation comes into the picture. If there's fewer people, the same amount of housing is closer to being enough to make housing prices go down, which needs to happen. They need to not just flatten out, they need to go down. They're too high. And then, because people have based their retirements and stuff on that, you really need to have the political will to, alongside that, do things like taxing the rich and redistributing money to middle-class families that can no longer rely on selling a house for their retirement, for part of their retirement, to because the price went down, to help fill the gap that's now created. Like, there's also problems with the whole U.S. economy and its international dominance being based on this debt, these mortgages, and leveraging that. So it may lead to some overall shrinking of the U.S. economy, which is all the more reason that pain needs to go to the rich who can afford it, not to middle-class families who relied on their homes for being able to retire without being absolutely impoverished when they retire. So it's expensive to need things. You would probably realistically need to both subsidize construction of new housing and put money into relieving the retirement savings shortfalls that this would create for many families. And so it's not looking to happen under capitalism, because capitalism is a self-destructive, short-sighted system. I've talked about this many times on my political videos, occasionally bits of it here and there. I wouldn't try to avoid too much about it in my really interesting, good game videos, but this is Sell the Singularity. If you're watching it, it's your own your own funeral. This game is stupid. It's a clicker. This is almost just like a politics video where you look at my desktop. As far as I'm concerned. Anyhow, wanted to get that stuff out of my head. Wanted to express my thoughts on it, and keep my brain clear so that when I do my actual gaming videos, aren't this like Boulder Myth, of Orion, Hearts of Iron 4, Vampire, Potioncraft, pop-up dungeon again someday. When I do those, they're not. I don't have these thoughts kicking around in my head that I want to get out, and I can maybe avoid talking about these things a little more. I still occasionally drop a thought, because otherwise you just look at me play a game and it's pretty quiet. Although, if you want something more chatter that's not political, my Age of Wonders 3 Let's Play series, because I'm doing that, not series, but I'm doing a multiplayer game with a friend and streaming it. And so we chat with each other, so I don't talk about this random stuff, because I'm busy talking about the actual game strategy. So, if this bothers you, go watch that if you're still with me and haven't already tuned out. I don't know. Maybe you find what I'm saying interesting. I don't know. I've got political videos for that. This has been a video. Not a great video. Maybe not one I'm most proud of. Definitely not as good as my other videos, but it's content for y'all. For those of you who are bored off your rears, tune in for my other, better series. This isn't really a series. Look at my political videos, whatever you want to do. I wish you all the best, really. Take care of each other. Be kind to yourselves. And may you always find a guiding star to lead you home. Adieu.